Okay, so welcome. Welcome to Unity Santa Fe Interspiritual Center. And as most of you know, Unity is a positive path for spiritual living where we support you with practical spiritual teachings that empower you to create a more meaningful and abundant life, with the caveat that you have to be willing to be transformed by what you hear here. So I heard that there were these two men that were marooned on an island. And one man paced back and forth, worried and scared, while the other man sat back and was sunning himself. And the first man said to the second man, "Aren't you afraid no one will find us and we'll die?" "No," said the second man. "I make $10,000 a week and tithe faithfully to my church. My pastor will find me." So today's message, The Wonder of Giving, will support you in consciously putting your money where your faith is. And this is the last in a series of messages based on Eric Butterworth's book, Spiritual Economics. And this week, the focus will be on chapters 10 and 11. Okay, so Unity Santa Fe is a welcoming interspiritual community that celebrates the oneness and divinity of all creation. Our mission is to raise consciousness, transform lives, heal the planet, one person at a time, beginning with me and beginning with you. Our Unity Santa Fe core values are God first, awareness, joy, love, appreciation, and humble surrender. And so I celebrate that we not only say these words, that we live them in everything that we think, say, and do out there where the rubber meets the road. So now our opening song is from a drumming meditation CD by our own soaring eagle, Jude Byrne, and her friend Carlos Planas. So Brian is having a few difficulties, but we know, here it goes. Wow, what a great video with that wonderful CD music from Jude and Carlos. And the name of that song was Happy. And Brian, you sure found a happy video to play along with it. Thank you all so much. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And now we have a special appreciation today that Jude is going to talk to us about, because we're celebrating a very special anniversary today. So take it away, Jude.
Thank you, Brendalyn. Good morning, everyone. We are celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the creation of the medicine wheel. And many of you were a part of a 3-day teaching and physical labor, including a bobcat to level the ground, and then a interspiritual blessing ceremony on that Sunday that had people, not only New Thought, represented by Reverend Brendalyn, and Mayan and pre-Mayan teachings by Wind Eagle and Rainbow Hawk, but Sikh was represented, the Sufis, Hindu, Judaism. It was a beautiful example of the oneness. And I want to tell you a little bit about Wind Eagle and Rainbow Hawk, because they really guided us through this celebration of our sacred land. And it was done with the intention of peace. And they carry with them an ancient body of wisdom, ways to balance and wholeness. And they were inspired by Black Elk's quote that before there can be peace between individuals and peace between nations, there has to be peace within the self. Our particular medicine wheel has crystals in it, in each direction and in the center, that were mined prayerfully with the intention for peace. It is another place, a sacred space to go pray. So I just celebrate that we have 10 years of this on our land, and I encourage you, it's a sacred outdoor space, to take advantage of it, especially now. Thank you to all.
today's message is the wonder of giving, and it will support you in consciously putting your money where your faith is. And as I said earlier, this is the last in a series of messages based on Eric Butterworth's book, Spiritual Economics. And we're focusing this week on chapters 10 and 11. So Eric Butterworth says, when you discover the wonder of giving, you will wonder how you live so long in any other way. When you discover the wonder of giving, you will wonder how you live so long in any other way. So the human condition that today's message focuses on is giving to source in order to receive. Giving in order to receive. And the spiritual solution is give a source to support our values, our mission, our vision. So Eric Butterworth says, God is the divine givingness of the universe, and you are created in the image likeness of this divine givingness. He says the purpose of life, but unfoldment and personal development. So I think we are like the lilies of the field that grow and unfold from a bulb to a flower. That's what we're here to do. And Jesus clearly articulated the divine law, give and it will be given to you. And this divine flow requires only one thing from you and me, and that is our consent to be a receiving channel by establishing ourselves in the divine flow. Butterworth said you can never really achieve this level of consciousness until giving becomes the main thrust of your life. In Jesus' teachings, he stressed the importance of having a giving consciousness in order to sustain flow in our lives. And he did not mean simply giving money. There are many ways and places to give. What's important is the attitude with which we give. Because when we give, we touch things. So it's the attitude with which we touch things that matters. Some other ways of giving beyond financially is in your work, in love, in service, in your attitude toward life, and in so many other ways that we invest ourselves. So I want to share with you this PowerPoint of a painting by the German artist Rosenthal. Is the blessing of work, the blessing of work. And so in the painting, you can see this young boy is carving a life-size sculpture of the Virgin Mary. And the almost completed figure towers above the young artist. And while he works intently carving the details of the feet, Mary is looking down upon him with love and with outstretched arms, blessing him. So while he is giving himself in the creative flow, he is dynamically receiving immeasurably in return. And the painting actually reveals even more. You notice that light is streaming through the open windows with its rays bathing him with an aura of illumination. And on a plaque by the window, a heavenly choir is singing paeans of praise directly toward him. And then by his side on the table, there's what we assume is a picture of his mother, which he is using for a model. And her hands are clasped in devotion. She's blessing him. Thus, the whole tone of the work suggests that the whole universe is rushing, streaming, pouring into the boy, while he quietly gives himself to creative effort. And this was all written by Butterworth, and he says it is a beautiful testimony to Jesus's teaching, give and you shall receive. So there's been many conversations and arguments about the difference in giving and tithing. And we're going to talk more about tithing part of the message. Jesus taught the law of giving and receiving, whereas tithing is a way of getting into a giving consciousness. It's not a substitute for a giving attitude. A giving attitude not only includes a monetary gift, but the joy of giving of oneself to a greater level of being. And this leads to a stronger connection to God and to the world, or I should say conscious connection, because we're already connected. So when we talk about giving to where we are spiritually fed, it implies that we're waiting until we get something before we give. And this is not true giving as Butterworth understood it. Rather, it's an exchange. Butterworth talks about giving without expectation of return, since we can't regulate the channel through which God gives. Khalil Gibran, in his classic work, The Prophets, says, "You give little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give." So that last statement, bear that in mind. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give. And I recall a statement in one of Herb Cain's columns in the San Francisco Chronicle back in the 60s. And I remember he was referencing this quote, "It is when you give of yourself that you truly give." And he remarked, "And now you know what his wife got for Christmas." I loved Herb Cain. All joking aside, when you give of yourself, you are truly stepping into the flow of giving and receiving. And although we are not to give in order to receive, that shouldn't be our intention, our motivation. The divine paradox is that we cannot give without receiving. As we give, we receive. The Bible tells us this. Not only the Christian Bible, but most, I think all major religious teachings include this idea of reciprocity, and that as we give, we receive. In Matthew, Jesus said to them, "Take heed what you hear. The measure you give will be the measure you get, and still more will be given to you." And from Luke, "Give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over." Georgiana Tree West, in her wonderful book, Prosperity's 10 Commandments, says, "The economics of God is very simple. We receive justly for all that we give, and we must give freely to receive freely. We must keep our good in circulation, not only in thought and word, but in the realm of action." And our wonderful spiritual prosperity teacher, Edwene Gaines, in her 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity, writes, "Faith expands when you give. The more you give, the more faith you are going to have. Thus, this message supporting you in putting your money where your faith is." And finally, Catherine Ponder, the other wonderful prosperity teacher in Unity, in her Secret of Unlimited Prosperity says, "When you think you cannot afford to give is the very time when you cannot afford not to give." So that takes us into the chapter 11, a new look at tithing. And Butterworth says, "Let's hear less of tithing and more of giving. Let us not be deluded by the claims of the magic law of tithing. Tithing is not a law, but a technique for fulfilling the law of giving." I want to say that again. Tithing is not a law, but a technique for fulfilling the law of giving. He says there's no need for magic when you work diligently to keep in the flow of life. So the practice of tithing, giving 10% of your income back to God, was instituted in the Hebrew scripture. There is no teaching of tithing, a mandatory giving of 10% of income, in Christian scripture. So Jesus didn't teach tithing. He didn't make a big deal of it, but he didn't condemn it either. And we know he was Jewish and that he practiced tithing, but he didn't make a big deal of it in his teachings. Rather, he was very specific. Give, and it shall be given unto you. And this is that law of reciprocity that, as I mentioned before, is taught in all the major religions. As we give, we receive. As we reap, so shall we sow. It's just a fact. It's the law. And Eric Butterworth reminds us that tithing is not an end, but a helpful means towards the end of total in consciousness. Jesus clearly talked about the Father within and the kingdom of heaven being within us. Yet often there's this idea of tithing to a God up there, giving back to God. Well, folks, God is divine substance itself, and God does not need our money. God is everything that stands under everything that is. So what is most important is for us to create within us a consciousness of giving and an attitude of gratitude for always being in the flow of good, being in the flow of God, and being an expression of God in action as the source for God's work in our spiritual community and in our world. So being locked in on the specifics of tithing 10% can live at the same spiritual level. Hey, or the same specific level. Hey, I'm off for receiving even more than 10%. How about you? So stepping away from the rigid 10% mandate might make some think that our spiritual community will receive less. But Butterworth says, au contraire. He says, on the contrary, it should lead to a more sustained and generous outpouring by people who are released from the pressures and stringencies of giving to the joy and affluence of true spiritual giving. You know, in the Hebrew scriptures, tithing was not a love offering. It was a law. It was required. And there were severe consequences if people didn't tithe. And I am so grateful that in Unity, tithing is a personal choice. And it's a wonderful way, as I can attest to, of really, to me, my 90% goes further than 100% used to go. And I don't limit myself to 10%. I give, the last time I calculated it, somewhere around 15%. And I have never missed any of that. I've always received so much more. Now, my colleague, Reverend Dr. Gary Simmons, first and second level tithing. And it is a goal we are focusing on in our mission-centered partnership plan. So first level tithing practice is tithing to source, the source of your spiritual nourishment. Tithing to source focuses on tithing almost as a way to receive from a supposed external source up there. But source is our spiritual identity, not something outside ourselves. I am source. I am the name of our divinity. I am source. So second tier tithing is a practice of tithing as source. Members and friends partnering with each other in our mission to raise consciousness, transform lives, heal the planet, inspiring each other to be the difference that we want to see in the world. Tithing as source raises the self-responsibility bar. It requires more emotional and spiritual maturity to tithe as source because it is about being in partnership rather than giving in order to receive. Simmons calls tithing as source the spiritual practice of radical generosity, as the intent is to be an extension of spirit, tithing to what we wish to see flourish. Tithing as source is God in action, God in expression. Tithing as source is not indifferent to the appreciation that we give for the wondrous ways we are spiritually nourished and blessed by being in this spiritual community. It is rather a focus of first cause, seeing that our purpose is to make a difference and to be the difference we want to see in the world. Tithing as source is about going beyond attending services to being active owners and partners of our spiritual community. When I moved to Los Alamos in October 1986, one of the first calls I made was to Unity Santa Fe to find out when and where I could attend Sunday services. Well, when the voicemail announced, "The number you have reached is no longer in service," I panicked. I couldn't imagine not having a Unity community to support, nourish, and inspire me. So the first Sunday, I drove from Los Alamos to Albuquerque to attend a Unity service, 100 miles each way. And I was prepared to make that drive on a regular basis because I couldn't imagine not having that nourishment once a week. And after the service, the minister told me that one of their licensed Unity teachers was in Santa Fe providing a Sunday service for a group of people who were trying to reopen Unity Santa Fe. So I called the licensed teacher and spent the night in Albuquerque so I could have lunch with her the next day. And prophetically, I said to her, "I will do anything to make sure there is a Unity in Santa Fe." Well, I guess the universe took me at my word. After that, I immediately became a member of Unity Santa Fe, and 4 months later, I was serving on the board of trustees. And that's when I realized what it costs to run a ministry. And I began giving more generously than ever before as a source for our spiritual community. So as you feel what it is to be part of our spiritual community, ask yourself, do I want this to be here tomorrow, next week, or next year? If your answer is yes, it requires you to step into the law of giving and receiving, knowing that the more we give, the greater flow we create, and the more we are source for what our spiritual community offers us to others and to the world. And this is true as you give to other nonprofits. You're giving to your values, to the work that you believe in. Unity Santa Fe, hopefully, as well as other organizations. So the Bible says in Luke, "Give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back." And there's that divine paradox. We don't give in order to receive, but as we give, we can't help but receive. So Unity film where our co-founder said, "Tithing is based upon a law that cannot fail, and it is the surest way ever found to demonstrate plenty, for it is God's own law of giving." Catherine Ponder in Secrets of Unlimited Prosperity says, and I said this before, when you think you cannot afford to give is the very time when you cannot afford not to give. And now I want to tell you a little story. In the years when our current board president, Tom McCrory, was frequently traveling and unable to attend services, I always looked forward and was always impressed that he consistently mailed in his tithe. And the check was always in a card featuring a beautiful nature photograph. And to top it all off, he always wrote a profound prayer affirming gratitude for our spiritual community and our prosperity. Those prayers were the reason I first asked Tom to consider being a prayer chaplain. And the checks are the reason I have asked Tom to share with us today a few remarks about tithing. And I'm so glad, Tom, that you've on a computer with a camera today. Take it away, Tom.
Well, thank you. You can thank Marlene for setting me up with a computer.
Quit sharing.
Yep. And I am Tom McCrory. I am today's Unity poster boy for our message, which is tithing. And my experience of tithing began in 1982. I had just gotten my master's degree in geology, all set to be a geologist, and unemployment was higher than at any time between the Great Depression 90 years ago and today. So I was selling sandwiches door to door in West Hollywood, barely surviving, and with the prospect of being a geologist like an impossible dream. Well, after work one afternoon, one of my coworkers took me to the Bodhi Tree bookstore nearby and forced me to buy a copy of Catherine Ponder's The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity. And it was there that I first was introduced to the law, or I believe we're calling it today, the technique of tithing. And it's very simple. It states you take 10% of everything you earn and you give it to where you get spiritual nourishment. You do it out of gratitude for that nourishment, but as you do, your affairs are prospered. Now, had my circumstances been less desperate, I would have dismissed this idea of tithing out of hand. But you know what? I tried everything else. Nothing had worked. And I was desperate. So I figured, I got nothing to lose. I'll give it a try. And to my amazement and delight, within a very short time, I was working as an exploration geologist doing work I loved all over the Western United States. Now, I want to emphasize one thing. Tithing is not a requirement for attendance at Unity Santa Fe. Tithing is a pact that you make with God, the divine, whatever your name is for your spiritual source. So if you have not been tithing and your life has not been, let's say, exactly where you'd like it to be, let me suggest that you give it a try. I think that with patience and persistence, you'll be very happily surprised at the results. And now, back to you, Reverend Brendalyn.
Thank you so much, Tom. And by the way, Tom, although we cashed the checks, I still have most of those cards and prayers. They are so precious. So how do we put feet on today's message? Well, we know the first way every week at Unity Santa Fe is prayer and meditation. So time in the silence to feel what it feels like to be in the abundant, never-ending flow as source. Feel that oneness as source. And be God in action. Give from a more than enough consciousness. Give a smile to a stranger. Give love for what you receive, regardless. Emily Cady says, forgiveness means to give love for. And give until it feels good, not until it hurts. And if you tithe, tithe freely, not because you should, not out of guilt, but because you want to give as source. So I celebrate that we go forward consciously putting our money where our faith is, knowing that we are the source of this spiritual community, fulfilling our mission to raise consciousness, transform lives, heal the planet. And let's begin doing that right now by being one together in a sacred time of shared prayer with Soaring Eagle Jude Byrne and Carlos Planas.
Entering our sacred garden. As we prepare to take a walk in the garden of our own being, let us take a few deep breaths, breathing in love, breathing out beauty, breathing in joy, breathing out love, breathing in beauty, breathing out love. As you look at your internal garden, are there any weeds of negativity, any blocks you'd like to release? It could be in your physical, your emotional, or your mental realm. Let the sound of the drum release those blocks. What seeds would you like to plant? Would you like more peace, more love, more compassion, more joy, more forgiveness, more flexibility, more awareness? Whatever seeds you'd like to flower in your garden, put them in to the sound, and it will move the energy to nurture you.